What's up, guys? I just had a couple thoughts about some of the discussion that's going on right now about the rules and the setup. So, the first thing is obviously something that gets brought up in relation to Devin and the way he sets up at the front of the pad. And he says, I can put my elbow wherever I want. Um, obviously, you know, I think we agree that you should start a match with fair webbing. You don't want one person to be much higher. Um, and for that to happen, the person with the longer arm just anatomically has to be further back. Is really this shouldn't really be a debate. It's really obvious. So like okay, so imagine Sasha was trying to get a grip with Yao Ming. Yao Ming's at the front of the pad like this. Do you think Sasha can even reach his hand? He can't. Like, so it's really obvious. It really, like I said, shouldn't be a debate. If one guy's arm is this long, another guy's arm is this long, he says, "Hey, I'm not gonna bring my elbow back." Then you just can't get a grip, right? Like, and so either you lower your arm until you start way off center, or for like literally just mathematically, like if you want to start at center, the longer guy has to go back. So that's the number one thing. Um, and as a ref, if a guy with a longer arm is insisting on putting his elbow forward, I think that's something that you should be looking at and thinking, okay, is he trying to do something? Because like so many matches where that they do let that happen, it just ends up being very unfair in the grip, in my opinion. Um, Second thing is loading and fighting in the setup. Like I'm all for the gamesmanship, like of making sure you get an advantageous setup, making sure that even though an arm wrestle is supposed to start fair, I understand that there's little details that give you an edge, and you want to make sure that you're experienced, you're smart enough to make sure that you never get fucked before the start. Right? That's obvious. Like I'm all for that, but um, as a sport, when you talk about arm wrestling, you don't really. So this is what you think of. So we got to go back to the intent of what the sport is supposed to be. So if you talk to anyone about, what do you think arm wrestling is? It's two guys or whatever. It's two people grabbing hands and then trying to pin the other guy to the table or whatever. Right? No one thinks of arm wrestling as it's a sport where two guys try to get a grip and then they just keep fighting until they get the grip they want. That's a different sport. That's not arm wrestling. Arm wrestling is you grab a grip and then it starts from this point, and everything that happens after that is arm wrestling. No one thinks of arm wrestling as, oh, it's a sport where two guys try to get to here, but both guys can move around, and that's the fight. And yeah, that is a fight, and that is there. That does have technique, and that does have whatever, like I said, gamesmanship. But that's not what arm wrestling is. Arm wrestling is two guys grabbing hands, and then whatever happens after that is arm wrestling. So I understand inevitably, um, to start a match fair, there's a procedure because, like I said, there are certain grips that are more advantageous. So that's why there's a ref's grip, and within those bounds, you can try to be as crafty or whatever as you can, to still make sure that you're getting the advantage that you want. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can load back in the setup, right? So loading back is something that I think everyone should do. It's something that I do a lot, but at the same time, I don't think it should be something that's legal if it's really obvious that you're doing it. So it's like if you're pulling back so hard in the setup that the other guy is like struggling to keep his elbow down, to yell elbow and say it's your job to put your elbow down is saying that an arm wrestle really starts before the go. And I just don't believe that's the case. An arm wrestle, um, in pretty much every context and every person's understanding, um, was not deep into this specific topic like a regular person, even like a new arm wrestler. An arm wrestle starts after you get the grip. And arm wrestle is not about getting the grip, right? Getting the grip is an inevitable part of the sport that allows you to actually arm wrestle after you've gotten the grip, but that doesn't mean that getting the grip should be a part of the fight. So that's like, say, you don't report something on your taxes, like I don't know, like you 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 cheat the taxes, whatever. That happens. Probably a lot of people do it, and it's inevitable. But like that doesn't mean you go up there and say, "Hey, I'm tax evading." Like it's like that. Like so. Again, if one guy is loading really, really, really hard and really obviously, and the other guy can't keep his elbow down, just based on the intent and what you know arm wrestling as a sport is understood to be, I just don't think it's the other guy's job to keep his elbow on the pad, because that just essentially means that he has to arm wrestle before the go, and he has to exert a lot of energy and basically lose his wrist every time before the match starts. So that's one thing. And yeah, like yeah, is it possible to completely stop someone from loading? Like of course not. Like you're gonna be able to load even you know even if there were robots refing or whatever, like 10%, 20%, you'll always be able to move a little bit. But that doesn't mean that the extremes are also valid. Just because you can't prevent something 100% doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. Um, so again, the idea that if you're pulling someone off the pad and they have to keep their elbow down, I think is just totally um, opposite of what their interpretation of the rule should be. Um, and another thing is like just say go and let them arm us. So it's like I get it, but really ultimately I think a reason why strict reffing leads to lots of fouls and boring matches is because arm wrestlers are not professional enough, even at the top level, to keep their elbows on the pad. Really, like it should be something that's a prerequisite to becoming a good arm wrestler, because obviously like for any sport, like what sport is there where you can have a rule set and if you break certain rules you lose, and then the very very best in the world are just incapable of not breaking that rule? That means you lose every time. Then how are you the best in the world, right? So um, I think really like the idea that calling fouls is some kind of detraction on the referees. I think it should be the responsibility is on the athletes, and if a match keeps ending up fouls, it's because the athletes fouled. I really don't understand why you would want a match to be unfair just because the athletes are not professional enough. And the fact that you say right now, like even at WAF, where those European guys are more fair, more experienced with stricter rules, so they're still, yeah, you're gonna say they're still boring matches, there's still lots of foul outs, then they got to be even more professional, right? I think it just shows where arm wrestling is at this stage. And in general, I just don't understand. I just don't really like the direction of a lot of these arguments. I think it's very short term oriented, where it's like just in that moment you'd wish that the match would start, or they would stop fouling, because the athletes aren't going to change the way they arm wrestle just in that moment. But in the long term, I just don't think it's leading the sport to very professional standards, and I just think ultimately it's really unfair to people, because inevitably someone's going to get really cheated, and it's going to end up and we're going to just have lots and lots of unfair results from matches just because of those few things. So yeah, like again, if you have a longer arm, you have to put your elbow back. It's super super obvious. If you're loading really hard before the go, you should have to hide it. Like if you're not even trying to hide it, then it's not the other guy's job. It should be a foul in a ref's grip, or warning outside a ref's grip. And it goes against the intent of arm wrestling to argue that that's part of the sport, because I just don't think that is. And again, blaming the referees when athletes foul, I think is just totally um, against what anyone should think in any sport, and also just goes against making our sport a more serious and professional one. So those are just a few of my thoughts.